Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Speak and Feel English, the place where conversations are not just about language, but about expressing yourself with confidence and clarity. I'm Mia.
And I'm Ethan. Today's topic is something that almost everyone struggles with at some point in their life. It's time to stop thinking and start talking. This is especially relevant for people who want to improve their communication skills, but often find themselves stuck in their own thoughts.
Absolutely, Ethan. I think one of the biggest barriers people face is overthinking. They constantly analyze what they are about to say, how they will sound, whether they will make mistakes, or how others might judge them. And in the process, they end up saying nothing at all.
That's such a powerful point. Overthinking creates hesitation, and hesitation kills confidence. It's almost like people are waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect sentence. But the truth is, perfection doesn't exist in real conversations.
Exactly. Conversations are meant to be natural, spontaneous, and sometimes even imperfect. If you listen carefully to fluent speakers, you'll notice that they pause, they rephrase, and sometimes they even make mistakes, but they keep going, and that's what makes them effective communicators.
I completely agree. And I think the fear of making mistakes is deeply rooted in how people are conditioned. From a young age, we are taught that mistakes are bad, especially in language learning. But in reality, mistakes are the fastest way to improve.
Yes, and let's be honest, nobody is judging you as much as you think they are. Most people are too busy thinking about themselves, so when you hesitate to speak because you're worried about what others might think, you're holding yourself back for no real reason.
That's so true. I remember when I first started working in a professional environment, I used to overthink every single sentence before speaking in meetings. By the time I was ready to speak, the conversation had already moved on.
That happens to so many people. And the worst part is you end up feeling frustrated because you had something valuable to say, but you didn't say it. Over time, this can even affect your self-confidence.
Exactly, and that's why the shift from thinking to speaking is so important. It's not about eliminating thinking completely, it's about not letting thinking stop you from taking action.
That's a great distinction. Thinking is important, but overthinking is harmful. You need just enough thinking to form your idea, and then you need to express it. Communication is a skill, and like any skill, it improves with practice.
And practice means actually speaking, not just thinking about speaking. You can watch videos, read books, and learn grammar rules all day, but if you don't open your mouth and speak, your progress will be very slow.
Exactly. It's like learning how to swim by reading a book. You can understand the theory, but until you get into the water, you won't really learn how to swim.
That's a perfect analogy. And I think people need to realize that speaking is not about being perfect, it's about being understood. If your message is clear, then you are already successful.
Yes, and clarity comes with practice. The more you speak, the more comfortable you become. Initially, you might struggle to find the right words, but over time, it becomes easier and more natural.
Another important point is that speaking helps you organize your thoughts better. When you keep everything in your mind, it feels messy and confusing, but when you speak, your thoughts become more structured.
That's such an important insight. Speaking is not just about communication with others, it's also about understanding yourself better. When you express your thoughts out loud, you gain clarity.
And that's why I always encourage people to speak, even if they are alone. Talk to yourself, describe your day, explain your thoughts, anything that gets you into the habit of speaking.
Yes, self-talk is incredibly powerful. It might feel strange at first, but it's one of the best ways to build confidence. You're practicing without any pressure or judgment.
And once you build that habit, it becomes easier to speak in front of others because you've already trained your mind to express thoughts instead of just holding them inside.
Exactly. And let's not forget that communication is not just about words, it's also about confidence, tone, and body language. When you stop overthinking, you naturally become more relaxed, and that reflects in your communication.
That's true. People connect more with confidence than with perfect grammar. If you speak with confidence, even simple sentences can have a strong impact.
And confidence comes from action. The more you speak, the more confident you become. It's a cycle. Speaking builds confidence, and confidence encourages more speaking.
I think the biggest question people have right now is how do you actually stop overthinking? Because it sounds simple when we say just start speaking, but in reality, it's not that easy.
You're absolutely right, Ethan. It's easy to say, but difficult to implement, especially when overthinking has become a habit. And that's the key word here, habit. Overthinking is not just something that happens occasionally. For many people, it's a pattern that has been reinforced over time.
That makes sense. So if overthinking is a habit, then the solution is to replace it with another habit, right?
Exactly. You don't just remove a habit, you replace it. And in this case, the habit we want to build is immediate expression. Instead of holding your thoughts inside and analyzing them repeatedly, you train yourself to respond them quickly and naturally.
That sounds powerful, but also a bit intimidating. How do you train yourself to respond immediately without feeling unprepared?
It starts with lowering your expectations. Most people overthink because they want their response to be perfect. But if you shift your mindset from I need to be perfect to just I need to respond, everything changes.
That's a big shift. So instead of focusing on perfection, you focus on participation.
Exactly. Participation is more important than perfection because every time you participate, you gain experience, and experience naturally improves your communication over time.
I like that. It takes the pressure off. But I think another challenge people face is the fear of silence. When someone asks them a question, they feel like they need to respond immediately, and that pressure leads to overthinking.
That's a great point. Silence is often misunderstood. A short pause is completely normal in conversations. You don't have to rush your response. Taking a moment to think is different from overthinking.
So it's about balance, taking a brief pause but not getting stuck in your thoughts.
Exactly. A short pause of 1 or 2 seconds is natural. But when that pause turns into a long internal debate, that's when it becomes overthinking. The goal is to keep the flow going.
That makes a lot of sense. I think another practical strategy is to simplify your language. People often try to use complex words or advanced sentences, which makes them overthink even more.
Yes, that's a very common mistake. Simplicity is powerful. You don't need complicated vocabulary to communicate effectively. In fact, simple and clear language is often more impactful.
So instead of trying to sound impressive, focus on being clear.
Exactly. Clarity over complexity. When you simplify your language, you reduce the mental load and it becomes easier to speak without overthinking.
That's such a practical tip. And I think another thing people can do is practice thinking in English, because often overthinking happens when you translate from one language to another in your mind.
Absolutely. Translation slows you down and increases hesitation. When you start thinking directly in English, your responses become faster and more natural.
But that takes time, right? It's not something that happens overnight.
Of course, it's a gradual process. You can start small. Think about your daily activities in English, describe what you're doing, or even create simple sentences in your mind. Over time, this becomes a habit.
That's a great exercise, and I think people should also stop being afraid of small mistakes, because honestly, most mistakes don't even matter in real conversations.
That's so true. Communication is about understanding, not perfection. If the other person understands your message, then you've succeeded. Small grammatical mistakes are not a big deal.
And in most cases, people won't even notice those mistakes.
Exactly. And even if they do, it's not the end of the world. Every mistake is an opportunity to learn. The more you speak, the more you improve.
I think another useful technique is to set small speaking goals. Instead of trying to become fluent overnight, focus on simple, achievable goals.
Yes, that's very important. For example, you can set a goal to speak for 5 minutes every day or to start one conversation daily. Small steps lead to big progress.
And these small wins build confidence over time.
Exactly. Confidence doesn't come from thinking, it comes from doing. Every time you speak, you prove to yourself that you can do it, and that reduces fear.
I also think it's important to create a safe environment for practice. Surround yourself with people who encourage you instead of judging you.
That's a great point. A supportive environment makes a huge difference. When you feel safe, you're more willing to take risks and express yourself.
And if you don't have people around you, you can still practice on your own, like we discussed earlier, talking to yourself, recording your voice, or even speaking in front of a mirror.
Yes, those are all effective methods. The key is consistency. It's not about how much you practice in one day, but how regularly you practice over time.
So, Mia, as we move forward, I think it's important to talk about mindset. Because no matter how many techniques someone learns, if their mindset is not right, they will still struggle to speak confidently.
I completely agree, Ethan. Mindset is the foundation of everything. If you believe that you are not good at speaking or that you will embarrass yourself, that belief will control your actions.
That's so true. Your thoughts shape your behavior. If your mind is filled with doubt, hesitation becomes natural.
Exactly. That's why the first step is to change how you see yourself. Instead of saying, I am not good at speaking, start saying, I am improving every day. That small shift can make a huge difference.
I like that. It turns a fixed mindset into a growth mindset. You're not labeling yourself, you're focusing on progress.
Yes, and progress is what truly matters. Nobody becomes a great speaker overnight. It's a journey, and every step counts.
I think another important aspect is self-acceptance. People often compare themselves to fluent speakers and feel discouraged.
That's a very common problem. But comparison is dangerous because it ignores your own journey. Everyone starts at a different point and grows at a different pace.
So instead of comparing yourself to others, compare yourself to your past self.
Exactly. Focus on how much you've improved. Even small improvements are worth celebrating.
That builds confidence naturally. And I think confidence is not something you were born with, it's something you build through experience.
Absolutely. Confidence comes from evidence. Every time you speak, you create evidence that you can do it. Over time, this evidence strengthens your belief in yourself.
That's such a powerful way to look at it. And I think people also need to stop fearing judgment so much.
Yes, fear of judgment is one of the biggest obstacles. But the truth is, people are not as critical as we imagine. And even if someone judges you, it doesn't define your worth.
That's an important point. You cannot control what others think, but you can control your actions.
Exactly, and your growth should not depend on someone else's opinion. If you let fear of judgment control you, you limit your own potential.
I also think it's important to reframe mistakes. Instead of seeing them as failures, see them as learning opportunities.
Yes, that's a game changer. Every mistake teaches you something, and the more mistakes you make, the faster you improve.
So, in a way, mistakes are actually a sign of progress.
Exactly. If you're not making mistakes, it probably means you're not pushing yourself enough.
That's a great perspective. And I think another mindset shift is to focus on communication, not language.
Absolutely. Language is just a tool. The real goal is to communicate your ideas effectively.
So even if your grammar is not perfect, as long as your message is clear, you are successful.
Yes, and that realization removes a lot of pressure. It allows you to focus on expressing your thoughts instead of worrying about every small detail.
And that makes speaking more natural and enjoyable.
Exactly. When you enjoy the process, you practice more. And when you practice more, you improve faster.
Now that we've talked about mindset, let's move into action. because at the end of the day, confidence comes from practice.
Yes, and not just any practice. Consistent and intentional practice. It's not about speaking randomly, it's about practicing with awareness and purpose.
That's interesting. What do you mean by intentional practice?
Intentional practice means focusing on improvement. For example, if you're practicing speaking, pay attention to your clarity, your tone, and your fluency. Try to improve a little bit every day.
So instead of just speaking, you observe yourself and make adjustments.
Exactly. Self-awareness is key. You can even record yourself speaking and listen to it later. It helps you identify areas where you can improve.
That might feel uncomfortable at first, but I can see how it would be very effective.
Yes, it does feel uncomfortable initially, but that discomfort leads to growth. When you face your weaknesses, you can work on them.
I think another important aspect is repetition. The more you practice speaking, the more natural it becomes.
Absolutely. Repetition builds familiarity. And when something becomes familiar, it feels easier and less intimidating.
So practice removes fear over time.
Exactly. Fear often comes from the unknown. When you practice regularly, speaking becomes something you are comfortable with.
I also think people should practice in real-life situations whenever possible.
Yes, real-life practice is very important. It exposes you to different situations and helps you adapt your communication.
And it builds confidence because you realize that you can handle real conversations.
Exactly. And even if you struggle at first, that's okay. Every experience teaches you something new.
I think another powerful technique is to ask questions. It keeps the conversation going and reduces the pressure on you to speak continuously.
That's a great tip. Asking questions not only helps you engage with others, but also gives you time to think and respond.
And it shows that you are interested and involved in the conversation.
Yes, and that makes communication more meaningful. Speaking is not just about talking, it's about connecting.
That's a great way to put it. And I think people should also celebrate their progress.
Absolutely. Acknowledge your improvement, no matter how small. It keeps you motivated and encourages you to keep going.
As we come to the final part of this conversation, Mia, I think it's important to bring everything together. We've talked about overthinking, habits, mindset, and practice. Now it's about transformation.
Yes, transformation from hesitation to expression. That's the journey we want everyone to take.
And it starts with a simple decision to speak, even when it feels uncomfortable.
Exactly. Growth always begins with discomfort, but that discomfort is temporary, while the benefits are long-lasting.
I think one of the most important lessons here is that action creates clarity. The more you speak, the more you understand how to improve.
Yes, and clarity builds confidence. When you know what you're capable of, you stop doubting yourself.
And that changes everything. You go from being hesitant to being expressive.
Exactly. And that transformation doesn't just improve your language, it improves your overall personality.
Because communication is a life skill. It affects your career, your relationships, and your personal growth.
Absolutely. When you can express yourself clearly, you create better opportunities for yourself.
And you connect with people more effectively.
Yes, and that's what communication is all about. Connection, understanding, and expression.
So if someone is listening to us right now and still feeling hesitant, what would you say to them?
I would say start today. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until you feel ready, because you may never feel completely ready.
That's so true. Readiness comes from action, not the other way around.
Exactly. Speak even if your voice shakes. Speak even if you make mistakes, because every time you speak, you grow.
And remember, progress is more important than perfection.
Always. Focus on being better than you were yesterday.
This has been such a meaningful conversation, Mia. I think we've covered everything someone needs to start their journey.
Yes, and I hope our listeners feel encouraged to take that first step and keep moving forward.
And with that, we come to the end of today's episode.
Thank you so much for listening to Speak and Feel English. If you found this conversation helpful, don't forget to take action and start speaking today.
And for more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and keep practicing with all our podcasts.
Keep speaking, keep improving, and most importantly, keep expressing yourself.
We'll see you in the next episode.